guys, it's Ian at SS8000 Cars, and as you probably have gathered from our collection video, we have at our disposal the Range Rover Evoque. Not just the Range Rover Evoque, but the latest generation Range Rover Evoque, which I think is really a wonderful reimagination, if I may use that word, of the original version. Now, to talk about the original version very briefly, sales were a resounding success, and over 750,000, I think 770,000 of them were sold worldwide over the 5 or 6 years that it's been in production. And apparently sales did not tail off in 2018. Now this car was launched in 2018, but in November, December 2018. So it's just about hitting the roads now. And I really like it. I think it's taken what I thought was a car that was almost a little twee, if I may use that word, and rounded it off, smoothed the edges, to an extent accentuated the sloping roof line. As standard with the new car is a full-length panoramic sunroof, which I just think makes the car look substantially more aggressive than it did in the past. Again, the front spoiler has been really reworked, and it really looks beautifully smooth. I just think it's a great design success, and it's quite difficult to do when you're relaunching a car that people have always said was a great success from the very beginning. And what they've tried to do is they've tried to not only bring it more up to date, but also to change some of the features of the old version to improve the looks, which I think they've achieved. So if we come round to the side of the car, the first thing you'll see is, actually you won't see this, but the first thing I can tell you is this car is shorter than the previous generation. It's also slightly heavier, which we'll come back to in a second. But in essence, they've elongated the wheelbase. So there's a little more room in the rear of the car. And I think that was necessary for the Evoque, because rear room in the past was not fantastic. I think it is now adequate. A 6-footer, as I'll demonstrate later, can sit behind a 6-footer. This one's running 20-inch alloys, which I think looks really nice. And I have to say that I suspect, although we've not had the car off-road, I suspect the fact that they've got the wheels further to the corner of each of the corners of the car means that its off-road capability will have been enhanced as well. And as you'll see when we go into the interior, it now takes the modern generation 3 digital screen layout, which was introduced with the Velar and then moved on to the Range Rover Sport and the full-bodied Range Rover itself. I think it's a really great looker. You can see quite clearly how the roof slopes downwards. Now that has a slight disadvantage in that obviously the glass available is also narrowing as it comes towards the back of the car, until you get to a point where at the back the screen is very narrow indeed. And I think that could potentially be a slight disadvantage were you not to be able to change the inside mirror into a camera assisted system, which takes away almost the back of the car, so you're looking straight out at the rear. So the rear headrests go, you're not looking through the window, you're actually taking cameras from the mirrors and cameras at the rear to project an image onto the mirror, which shows everything behind the car. Very, very clever, and I'll show that later. Now this Evoque is the D180 HSE with our dynamic pack, so it's quite well spec'd. There are a number of Evoques available. In the diesel range we have the D150, which is 150 PS, the D180 and the D240, and again 180 PS, 240 PS. And what I found is that the D180 is perfectly adequate for town use, for motorway use, lacks a little something if you're shooting through the country lanes. Now, we've had this car for almost a week now, so I've had it on a couple of long journeys and I've had it through the country lanes, and I'll talk about the differences where I think the principal difference between the Generation 2 Evoque and the first generation is in the way they have gone luxury car with the new Evoques. As you know, we had the Porsche Macan recently, now the lower version with 240 brake horsepower. That was a car focused for sports and performance use, so around the country lanes is actually great fun. And given SUVs are not renowned for being able to be chucked around country lanes, that is something. Really, this car is not made for that. The suspension is softer, the coils and springs give a greater degree of travel, so it really does mop up any of the imperfections in the road. But in the Macan, it doesn't do it to that extent, although I thought it did it pretty well. But this one has an element of body roll, which slightly makes positioning of the car in corners compromised. But if we come back to the engine, the diesel engines, I'll show you under the bonnet in a second, but to be absolutely honest, although they're the latest Ingenium engines from Range Rover, Land Rover, they're not great. And I haven't tried the D240, but this one, if you're anything below 60 miles an hour, is, I'd say, borderline noisy. And the diesel engines, to my mind, have never been a particularly nice noise. Now, we find in my wife's 6-cylinder diesel X3 that it can be a little clattery when it's cold and at very low speeds when it's cold, but as soon as you get it up to temperature, 6 cylinders, you don't notice the diesel. And this is a car that's 7 years old. You'll never ever not know you're driving a diesel here, and I think that's a pity. I would have thought with the latest generation of diesel engines, and I've driven Porsche diesel engines, and you know, the Porsche diesel engines, really you're not aware of it either, but in this you definitely are. Now that is because this is a 2-litre 4-cylinder engine, and I think diesel 4s are not the best, whereas the Porsche engine was also a 6-cylinder. You can see here that they've taken the lights from the bigger Land Rovers to sort of, and at the front, to make the car sort of have a continuity of design from the Evoque right the way through to the main Range Rover, and I think that looks really smart. And then they've continued the black along the rear, which has Range Rover on it. I just think there's a really nice continuity to it, and I like the rear diffuser. Not sure how purposeful that is in terms of providing additional downforce, but I think it looks lovely. And I think the R design pack gives you a combination of black and the silver paint in this particular car. It's got a very slight browny tinge actually. So you can see there's cameras here over the number plate, and there's also a camera in what I suspect is your rear aerial. So just to give you fantastic vision, I'll show you that a little bit later. One of the things about the latest generation Range Rovers, of course, are these handles. I think they're fantastic. If I shut the car up, obviously the wing mirrors pull in, but then the car is completely flush down the side. Now, as I said when I tested the Velar, the biggest benefit of that is you don't get your hands dirty when you want to get into the car. So you open it up, and obviously this has been tucked away. When we had the Range Rover Velar on the test, we took it down to Dartmoor, and on the journey down, it bucketed down. The roads round where we were staying were absolutely filthy. So the car was covered, and even although I tried to clean it up a bit for the test, we had a storm the night before, and it was just, but you were able to open the door without getting your hands wet. I'll show you the engine briefly. One of the things I want to demonstrate here is how far forward that engine is. And to be truthful, and how high it is, to be truthful, that is one of the reasons that this car is perhaps not the best handling car in its class. Because the Porsche that we tested, the engine was fitted quite a bit back into the bulkhead. I mean, it wasn't as far back as something like our Ferrari FF, but this is well forward. I mean, nobody's bothered to worry about whether this car has the ultimate handling, I would say, because there's a lot of weight in that engine, and diesel engines in themselves are not particularly light. As far as petrol engines are concerned, they do a 200 PS, 250 PS, and a 300 PS petrol engine, but they're all 2-litre 4s. I expect that the petrol engines will be the sweet spot, because I'm not getting more than 30.5 fuel consumption out of this, which is borderline disappointing, because I got over 30, just over 30 in the Porsche Macan with 240 brake horsepower, so 250 PS, and it's petrol. So it tends to indicate that this car is fairly heavy, which brings me on to another part, which is, if I just close that up, the other part of this is that this car is high tensile steel, not aluminium, and you might be asking yourself, why, with Land Rover, Range Rover's experience in aluminium bodied cars, and with Jaguar as well, so JLR, why is it that they didn't use aluminium here? And the reason that they give is because this is a very compact car, and with aluminium you need thick structural sections. Unfortunately, it's not practical to have this car in aluminium because they've minimized the structural sections in the car, and apparently to get the rigidity they required, it had to be made in steel. So I guess we've got to accept that. Despite being slightly shorter than the previous generation, this car is heavier. So I think, you know, it's over 2 tons. So I think when it's with petrol and 2 people and oils and stuff, and I just think that's quite a lot. You know, manufacturers have got to get the weight down. But on the other hand, I'm also told that one of the things about heavier cars is they absorb the bumps, and this car has definitely been aimed at the luxury sector, because they've left the Porsche Macan and probably the Jaguar F-Type to their own devices, so they're more sporty, a slightly sportier image, and this is for the guy that maybe can't afford or doesn't want such a big car as the Range Rover Sport or the Range Rover Velar, and comfort is his first priority. And again, as you'll see in a second, this has all the tricks that the larger Range Rovers have in terms of off-road capability. Now this car will weigh up to 600 mil. Now 600 mil is quite a level. It's here. Now that's pretty impressive, I think, for this type of car. 900 mils is the deepest wading I've ever come across, and that was in the 500 squared G-Wagon. So this is hardly a G-Wagon. So I think that's very impressive. And I like it. I mean, I really like it. And I think the thing about us all is most of the time we drive quietly and gently and sensibly, and we want something quiet and comfortable that in really bad weather is nice to have as a partner when you're driving home from the office or wherever it is. I think this fits the bill beautifully. So coming round to the boot, for this class of car, it's good. It's good room. Then under here you have another section here which you can hide stuff away, and in front of that is the toolkit and the like. So I think it's It's well appointed. I am utterly sure you could get a person in there if you really needed to. And again, like is always the way these days, push button, electronic tailgate. Okay, welcome to the interior of the new second generation Evoque. The first thing I want to point out, which is what Land Rover call the clear sight rear view mirror, and in this mode it's just normal. So the view out the back isn't great because you have a limited amount of window. But if I do this, watch what happens. Now this is not a mirror anymore. It is a combination of the different angles from 4 cameras. 2 on the wing mirrors and 2 at the back of the car. So if you suddenly see that there is no obstructions, it's almost like the back of the car has been cut off and you're seeing exactly what is behind you. So you're not limited in any way by the size of the rear window. The only thing I'd say is that you get a slight magnifying effect. So sometimes when you're parked and the car's right behind you, it looks like the front of their car is actually inside your boot, which is a slightly strange experience, but you get used to it. And you can run it like this when you're actually driving. So again, because it's a screen, because you're quite close, you have to make sure that you focus on it properly. But I think it's a wonderful piece of technology, and I think it really transforms the car. So again, down here, if I go to camera, we also, if you see what I mean, it looks like the boot's been taken away, and you can go to that camera anytime you want. You don't have to be going, you don't have to be in reverse, so you can see very clearly what the parameters are and what's behind you. So it's a very easy car to place. You can see all digital screens, digital screen in front of you, which you can pull the navigation up into if you so desire. And then you have here, you have a screen in the center of the dash and then a lower screen in the dash, which I'll show you now. So to start the car, usual way, foot on the brake. So here I've got a digital screen in front of you set up with the left-hand side on the trip summary, the central rev counter with the amount of fuel you've got in on the left and the temperature of the engine on the right, lower right, with the speed mileometer in the middle, also above that showing which gear you're in. Obviously I'm in park here. However, I can pull up the menu on the left-hand side and it asks me what I want to put into the left panel. So if I scroll down here and I go into layout, it asks me what dial I want, how I want it set up. Now the left hand screen is in the middle. We have the mileometer on the left hand side and the rev counter on the right. As you can see with diesel engines, they don't rev. Now, this one's red-lined at 4. I suspect you'd probably get a bit more than that out of it. Not that you'd necessarily want to. You have infinite capability to set this up exactly the way that you want it. I really like the vehicle settings down here, and I really like my media in the middle, which is why I quite like having one screen in the center with your sat nav on the right-hand side. A nice touch. The middle screen here is all about your navigation section, your media section and your phone section as it's set up at the moment. You can scroll through the home screen, and one of the things that Range Rover have finally introduced is Apple CarPlay, which I know is important to some. But all the information that basically is available is very easy to get at. And then all the dials down here allow you to go from rear camera. You obviously have the surround view here, so you can see where the car is positioned. Then if you want to go to music, it gives you the information about here, and you can also have a compass here if you want as well. Down here it always starts off with your air control, so whether you want air on your knees, on your on your face or above you, whether you want it synced, what temperature you want and what fan setting you want. I tend to have it in vehicle because I think that's the prettiest of the dials. And here you can run through all the different options from eco to comfort. Comfort is where I tend to have it. And then the different off-road settings, as you can see, grass, gravel, snow program, mud ruts program, and sand. So, you know, I mean, clearly this is a four-wheel drive car, so therefore at the end of the day it's capable of going off-road, and I suspect quite a few owners that choose Land Rover will take it off-road. One of the things I do like is the full panoramic roof. It doesn't open, i.e. the glass roof doesn't open, but it's rather nice because it really lends an airy feel to the car. Unlike my Panamera, which is subdivided in the middle, even although on the outside you have glass all the way across, but here it's one section, and I think that's really good, but it's fixed. In the Range Rover you have both a heated front screen and a heated rear screen. I quite like that. I mean, if you're iced over in the morning, you just hit the front screen and within 30 seconds you're ready to go. And of course, unlike demisting a car where the second you go off it starts misting up again, of course, because there's heat in the elements, they'll stay that way. Had it on our Mini as well. Heated steering wheel, but that's fairly commonplace these days. So here again you have hill descent control, which is fairly standard for this type of car, but isn't available on the Panamera, although it was available on the Macan. So as you can see, I'm sitting in the back of the car. Nothing particularly fantastic about sitting in the back of the car, although I will say that the panoramic view roof makes the view out really nice. I mean, it makes it nice and airy. So if you were going to sit in the back on a long distance, I think you could do that in this car. The rear seats here don't recline. The rear seat backs don't recline. They are quite upright, but I think I said that of the Porsche Macan as well. There is a sufficient amount of room here. I'm not going to suggest that it's cavernous, and I'd say probably the Macan, which is one of the less good rear rooms, it's probably in line with the Macan. I mean, there's plenty of room in front of your knees, but you're not going to stretch your legs out in any way. So I'm not sure I'd like to go far with 5 people in this car, but for 4 it would be perfectly fine. And you know, 500-mile trips in at a shop would be good, as long as you stopped reasonably regularly to stretch your legs. Guys, I hope this review, full review, has been of use to those of you who might be thinking about buying one. One of maybe the disadvantages of the car, other than the engine, which we've talked about earlier, if you need to have a diesel, it'll do the job. But if a diesel is not absolutely paramount, I would go for the petrol. I think you'd enjoy it more. I'm led to believe, although I've not driven one, that the engine noises that emanate are much nicer than you get from the diesel. And again, you probably need the 250 PS version to really make the car exciting to drive. Again, it is focused on the luxury sector more than on the performance sector, and I think that is probably true generally of Range Rovers across their ranges. I found that with the Velar, although actually the Velar was maybe the exception, because the Velar is based upon the F-Type chassis, so the Jaguar F-Type. Little more sporty, the Velar, I'd say, than this one, but you know, it is very much individual. Try it out, see what you think. I personally would still go for the Porsche Macan, because I like a slightly harder suspension, and I like to get that feel through the steering. You don't get the same levels of feel through the steering of the Evoque that you do in the Macan, but again, that's not something that may be high in your priority list. Okay guys, it's Ian from SS8000 Cars. signing off. Thank you for watching.